another episode and discussion of AyAyAyAi, where we discuss AI machine learning with guests of all kinds. And today, oh man, I don't think we've ever had somebody of your caliber in this discussion yet. Uh, so yes, you will be challenged, and I'll be challenged with you because I have to figure out how we can have this very important discussion and keep it in line without getting lost because there's so much to unfold. This is a Pandora's box. We're going to talk about topics that are in your field of interest. And, before I do that, let's make an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Sure, and I'm immediately uncomfortable, Asif, because you just said I'm an expert, and I'm always uncomfortable being called an expert. I haven't ever been able to hold down a full-time job, and the expert said the world was square, and they were quite wrong. So I'm quite happy to be with you during this time and to deliver any of the wisdom that I can share, but I am not an expert in any way, particularly about technology and artificial intelligence, but I am glad to be sitting with you. I am Barry Sommer. I'm a certified school psychologist. I'm a licensed educational psychologist. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and along with a practice and a consultation practice to organizations, I have the good fortune of teaching negotiation and conflict resolution at Columbia University, which is a graduate program for people who are seeking a master's degree in peacemaking. And that's where I had the excellent fortune of connecting with Asif. So that's what brings me to the table.
Yeah, I think that's a humbling introduction because the amount of respect, amount of admiration that you have from everybody that you have worked with or taught uh, is just a surface, right? Because that comes with years of experience and actually doing the due diligence and doing the best to pass it on to the next generation. As in, you have so many students that I think pivoted in their career choices based off of your teaching it, and I think that's what it means to be respected and admired. Is that people look up to you and people see you as somebody that they want to be, and then I think that's very powerful.
Thank you, thank you, Asif. Now I'm not only an expert, but now I'm old as well. I'm passing it on to the next generation.
At one point or another,
I'll agree with that one. That's okay. Comfortable with that.
So I think like when we talk about human behaviors, human psychology, interpersonal skills, and it gets really touchy. It gets really nerving to somebody to say, "Well, there's an AI for that, right? There's that AI something, or introduction, or interruption, or disruption, or augmenting by an AI." Uh, it becomes very sensitive because when I think of it, like what's that one word that's creeping up as day goes by is trust, right? As day goes by, it's becoming more and more relevant, and in the surface concern is the trust. We have trust issue amongst ourselves, we have trust issue with technology, and when another human develops a technology and the trust becomes the problem in adoption of that technology, it's not because technology is the one causing that trust issue. It's the trust in other humans that's causing that technology trust issue, right? So we talked about how universities and how schools are adapting to it, how the students are adapting to technology like AI, machine learning. Um, Tell us a little bit about your thought here, like that trust. I think it's a human instinct that it's not really focused on a lot. But when you do focus and you start unraveling it, you realize how much of your life depends on trust.
It's the foundation of all relationships. Rapport and trust are the central focus of building relationships. And indeed, I think you characterize it well. I think there's some clear issues, both with the use of technology and particularly with machine learning. And we're seeing that bots are getting in the way of building trust because they're targeting us based on the information that they receive about where we go and what we look at and who we are based on who we bring to the table or to the chair and to the computer. And I think that there's both positive and negative features to that. And I think it brings us to the bigger discussion about the ethics of artificial intelligence and the concerns about who's managing that right now. In one of the districts that I spend a bunch of my professional time in, we have adopted a policy that says, let's teach and embrace this technology because it's going to be another essential tool in teaching and learning. But as we look into it, very much like our adoption of technology back in, 20 years ago when we gave a device to every learner, and 15 years ago when we made sure that that learner had a device that was connected to the internet. There were many, many clear benefits, but also some very clear risks attached to that adaptation and that adoption. And one of those is about who's managing the ethics, and right now it appears that there's some tension in the field about who's managing that. And we're not paying attention, from my perspective, to the essential nature of those ethical positions that can be communicated clearly as well as we need to. We thought once we got into it that the internet and was one of the greatest equalizers in education.
That's right.
When we talk about equity, everyone having access seems like an essential foundational component to good teaching and learning. And yet, there's certainly been some negative consequences that we're just beginning to understand about the harmful, outcomes associated with those tools. I see people, and obviously the pandemic just amplified all of this because we were isolated and we were home and we were using our devices even more. But I have to spend, many more minutes teaching people how to greet each other, how to listen to each other, how to look at each other when we're not just seeing what you're seeing on screen right now, how to read body language, how we are wired in social ways that are very part of our humanity, let alone the, access to things we shouldn't be seeing at different ages and in different contexts, and harmful content and the addictive nature of technology. So we didn't see those things. I think there's many parts of AI that we're excited about. I'm particularly excited about several of them, but I don't know that we're looking at all of the potential human dangers in that. And I'm not sure who we're trusting to do that work right now. I don't, I think the SEI neutral net is a good idea, but I'm not sure there's neutrality, and I'm not sure who those people are, and I don't know anything about how they're building trust in our ability to understand the limits and the benefits of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's like of course, this is a machine learning podcast, AI machine learning podcast, and let's just make that little connection between everything you have said And with machine learning runs off of mathematics, runs off of equation. But the equation for trust is that trust equals time divided by persistence, right? So if something is persistently available and time passes enough, you develop trust in it, right? So I've developed trust in you because I've known you for many, many years and we have persistently stayed in contact over the time. So trust has developed between me and you. And well, that's just an equation. That's just the equation that a dumb system can learn and implement, right? And all systems are dumb. It's just as easy as just giving it an equation and making it work. On the other side, you could have a bad information that you can have persistent contact with, and over time you rely on that bad information, and you rely on that bad information as a trust with your life. And it
I'm
happens a lot.
trusting that I'm speaking to the Asif hitter that I know. But theoretically, a bot could be emulating you right now. Your voice is we certainly have the technology to do that today.
That's
We're
right.
getting very close,
That's right.
with computer generated images to this. I could be talking to a bot that's going to influence me very differently about who you are. That's a frightening notion to me. When I
Absolutely.
speak to my children or my wife, I want to speak to my children or my wife. I don't want to speak to a constructed image of my kids and my wife. So
Yeah, man.
I think trust is central, and the algorithms that are being used are thoughtful, often the best we have available, but in the wrong hands,
That's right.
with with intentions that are not in humanity's best interest. I think they can be wrought with dangers that we're just beginning to think about.
And when we discuss spectrum, we discuss the spectrum that there's good and the bad. There's internet that has a good internet and a bad internet. Dark web and all these other things that we can go through and unfold. But that just means that we're tribal, right? The having two sides of the spectrum is that we have tribes in between all of them, right? Some tribes are always in conflict. Some tribes are just loving each other to the death, and some tribes are just not engaging at all, right? So that's just tribal human mentality, and to not have that tribal mentality impact the intelligence that we as a human intelligence are developing as an artificial intelligence, it's unavoidable, right? How do you live with that? Right? How do you live with that, and how do you develop it from its infancy to a point that it's like I said, time and persistence, right? How it performs over time and how persistently. I think I'm using the wrong word here. I meant to say consistently, right? Is that? I think
Persistence and consistent. I think
yeah.
both of them matter, but
Both of
yeah, I
them
think
matter, right.
consistently.
Somehow it caught my ears that I'm not using the right word here. But like when the performance are happening without really losing value or improving efficiency over time, that performance with that artificial intelligence, which was developed by human intelligence, is just bound to have these tribal mentality or spectrum of good and bad. It just has to happen because that's mimicking human intelligence, not an alien intelligence, right? So, uh, we talk about internet, where it started and where it's heading. Well, it started based off of communication. We've been communicating for thousands and thousands of years, and here we are. We're having internet. It's just another medium of communication. But what has happened to human communication at this point? That the language that's able to fake itself, right? You mentioned earlier, you're talking to your, your close ones, your spouse, right? And what if you're meeting a stranger who does not speak English and all of a sudden he is communicating to you through Zoom call in English and you have no idea that person doesn't speak English, right? And these are all within the spectrum of deep fake. Deep fake is actually a term that sounds very scary, but here we are. Deep fake has a very good side to it, right? That side that says, how do I bring these tribal people who are not engaging with each other, excuse me, Now you're able to engage without hesitancy in zero latency latency right? Just like you be able to hear you in English and he has never spoken English or she has never spoken English, all of a sudden you're communicating without any latency. And I think that's the beauty of those intelligence and bringing the tribal minds together and start engaging, and then brings this tribe closer. And as you bring the tribe closer, one of the fears that I have is that these tribes will become large enough that they will just split into two, and then two fighting with each other is a whole other problem that maybe we don't want, but we can definitely talk ourselves into it. Like you said earlier, because of technology, you have to teach people how to greet each other these days, right? You have to be able to say, this is what you have to do in person because you're no longer in a Zoom anymore, right? So I think the as you communicate, as you develop trust, and you can teach, right? You communicate and you develop that trust, and you teach over time, and people tend to learn. People tend to behave because our brain is a giant pattern machine. That's all it is. And I don't mean to diminish that capability. It's just that's what it does with neural network. Your neurons, there's 86 billion of them. They're all pattern based. They just have patterns built into them. And if it learns a new pattern, it feels good, but it doesn't feel good right away, right? So as you're communicating, as you're developing a trust and you're teaching, that teaching I think is a difficult moment of our existence, is that we have to learn a new pattern now, right? Like, what do you mean walking is not enough? I have to run, and somebody has to teach me how to run. That's not that's not the greatest feeling ever. But we eventually learn everything, and we get okay with it, right? We trust our capability to perform that new teaching. And I think to sum it up all into three words, which you have taught me very well, is once you know, you start doing, and once you do, you become it, right? You start being. Knowing, doing, and being has been a good stepping stone for me to understand and always keep in mind. So
Mm.
I guess where I'm going with all of these questions is that when we teach, right, artificial intelligence, how can artificial intelligence, in your mind, augment that teaching part of things, right? I don't know what we're teaching. I don't know if it's good or bad, but just say in general we're teaching. Like, what does that look like to you? What do we need? What's missing? What's that opportunity? What's your thought on
Well, thanks for that good long question. And
that?
I wish it was so simple
Right.
as, the challenge of identifying good versus, deep fake, because it's way more subtle than that, unfortunately. And the tools that we're developing um, are not necessary. They may be incredibly intelligent. They rely on billions of pieces of data offered by billions of people with algorithms that are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. I'm really hoping that one will make my car drive to work fully automated and safely soon.
Yeah,
But right now, it's not safe.
that's
And I have to pay attention and I have to use my human capacity. And it's the same thing in the psychological sphere. It's not all simple, and it's not delivered with empathy. And AI doesn't cry. AI is not sad with me.
right.
AI doesn't experience joy and relief and any of the range of feelings that human beings experience. So I think there's some clear limits. I think we integrate it into teaching and learning when we expose people to it in thoughtful ways, slowly, and we use best practice, and we have people who are trusted as the deliverers of that knowledge. So I think when institutions that are making decisions about AI put together committees, they just want to be really thoughtful about who they have on that committee. And in education, I think it's really essential that young learners sit on those committees because they're the end users along with us as educators. And I think that their experience is invaluable in shaping how we teach. And and then we find great examples of the use, and there are many. It's phenomenally useful. I am a grant writer, and it's phenomenally useful to have ChatGPT edit a little piece of my grant to make it infinitely more readable, even though I bring 45 years of experience in writing it in ways that the readers are going to best understand it. It's going to make it better.
That's right. That's right.
But I also have to be remarkably thoughtful about ensuring that I read every word that it's giving back to me, because it's also giving me information that's not always accurate and that may be biased. So I'm sitting in that really important place of making decisions about using it and using it extensively and monitoring its use and ensuring that it's doing and bringing the outcomes that I had hoped for. A really good example of that, Asif, recently in my private practice, where I do some marriage counseling. I do premarital counseling, and a couple just came last week. Very highly educated people, physician, man, real estate woman, and they're struggling because they're wondering if they can maintain their marriage of 32 years. Most of the time people are coming in for marriage counseling, it's really pre-divorce counseling. Most people have made a decision that they're not able to sustain their marriage. In this case, there's 3 children. There's an incredible history of connections in both families, across cultures. It's been a rich union for both of them. But the man comes in saying, I went on ChatGPT to find out whether I should be investing in my marriage or not. And it did bring me to counseling, which I thought was interesting. It could have brought him to another bot that would have done that counseling for him, probably not with the same outcomes that I would imagine he could have in a personal setting, but still some positive outcomes. But what it did is it provided him incredibly rich data about the likelihood of his marriage surviving. And I think it did that in probably in 7 or 8 seconds, in ways that would have taken days and days and days to discover just a few months ago, maybe a couple of years ago. And certainly search engine days would have taken trips to the libraries of major colleges and universities. And then you still would have had conflicting and contrasting information you would have to sort through. It did a really good job in its algorithm of sorting through that and giving him 4 sentences and talked about the likelihood of his marriage surviving, which, by the way, is different if there's an infidelity and different if it's an infidelity on the female side versus the male side. In this case, his wife had an affair, which she then admitted to. And by the way, the data, which is just very interesting, is very clear that if there's honesty around the affair, about a 15% better chance of being able to manage that and stay married. So again, the human part of good communication, honest communication, even in very difficult, maybe among the most difficult contexts, matters. But he came in and, he's saying, well, there's only a 41 to 42% chance that this marriage is going to work because of my wife's, experience. And I'm kind of feeling like, we should begin to do some, divorce counseling and get a forensic accountant and start the work of separation. And the AI, as good as it was, and it would be a fairly useful tool for me as the mediator, biased him in such a negative way because it wasn't specific to his content and context. It didn't pay attention to who he was. It wasn't empathetic. It didn't understand that there was trauma in the wife's experience, that she's menopausal, that she is losing her children who are happily and healthfully moving out of the home, and that there's a lull in real estate in the valley here where they live, and all of these conditions which contributed to the context were not attended to by the AI. And I think the AI did a really good job of delivering data in the average kind of way to the average person. And neither of the people sitting in my office are average people. In fact, you're not average. I'm not average. There is no average. And Todd Rose wrote a beautiful book called The End of Average, where he talks about the fact that there really is no average. And the book opens with a great military example that you've probably heard me talk about in the past. But post World War II, they were trying to figure out how to reconstruct a cockpit in a fighter so that it was a better fit for the pilots. At that point, I think there were 2,200 Air Force pilots and Navy pilots that they took hundreds of measurements of. They measured their arm lengths and their finger lengths and their leg lengths, and they then averaged all of that data. And they built a cockpit for the average fighter pilot, which were almost all white men, by the way, at the time.
Yep.
Much more diverse group right now, but
Right.
it didn't fit a single one of the 2,200 pilots because there's no average. That's not helpful to me to have an average car. I'm a tall person.
That's
So
right.
the engineers were smart enough to say, let's make seats adjustable. Let's make the cockpit wheel, they call it something else now, adjustable. Let's
Right.
make the controls come back to the people who have shorter arms. And they did all of that, which made it so much better for everyone. There is no average. And AI is working toward delivering its content and its understanding and its machine learning in a way that reminds me of the fact that there is no average person. And
There's
in
no-
this case, there was no average context for their marriage that was benefited by that quite biased position. Data isn't the whole story, Asif.
Right.
More
I
than
think
data, there's relationship, there's context, there's timing, there's all sorts of aspects about human communication that we need to pay attention to.
I think artificial intelligence was coined around 1907, so a little over 100 years ago. And these days I can't call it artificial intelligence because I just keep calling it augmenting intelligence because it's
Okay,
supposed to
that's fair.
augment the
Thank you.
intelligence. But after this conversation, I want to call it average intelligence. That's literally what it does. It takes the mean and the average and just makes something happen. Mean and the mediums to say, you know, this is what 8 billion of the population will most likely agree on. So whatever that they agree on is the information I'll give. But when the system becomes narrow enough, it will only provide whatever the data, the average of that data is, right? So, I think that average intelligence mixed with another average intelligence draw a picture for you that is not so average anymore. As in, it's creating that Jenga like intelligence where if the human in the loop is not aware of how the vulnerable this Jenga is from falling apart if all intelligence are not stacked right? So this capability that a human brings into the discussion, the human in the loop, is the responsible party here. And I believe that wholeheartedly is that to rely on an artificial intelligence is like relying on sugar package that says artificial in it. And then when it tastes different, for you to get mad about that sugar not tasting like sugar or honey is up to your responsibility. It's an artificial sugar. It's just like an artificial intelligence. It will not perform the way it has to perform. But human nature having that trust equation built into it, right? For that consistency and time. And within consistency and time means whatever pattern that we have adopted to, for it to have any different pattern than what's been already recognized, is a difficult transition. It's something that we refuse to. I know I specifically refuse to do anything other than artificial intelligence because I don't want to change the pattern in my head. The patterns that I've developed over time is the patterns that I am very friendly with, but I become very animal like if there's a pattern that is new and I have to adjust to it. Absolutely have a fight mindset rather than a flight mindset when it comes to that.
But what happens if I'm studying your patterns and I'm delivering you information based on the way your patterns are telling me you learn and you process and you want to hear, and then I'm shaping it in a way that might be subtly different but still familiar and comfortable and not threatening.
That's that's what a
Mhm.
psychologist, that's what a therapist, that what anybody who has that new sets of knowledge about how to guide somebody into asking the right question would do, right? And framing this question means you already know, you do it. How do you become it? How do you become that person rather than say, do what's good for you because we all recognize it's good for you. How do I get you to do it more often so you keep doing it rather than quit on it?
Mhm.
Right.
And
So I think you know,
that's the conversation between influencing you, persuading you, and or manipulating you.
and or manipulating it because it's
Okay.
personalized to everybody. And
And
that's
yes,
right.
people are hiring me to influence them,
That's right.
sometimes to persuade them. And they're trusting, as you said, the trust word, they're trusting that their best interests are my priority.
That's right.
But anytime I err away from that, then I may be manipulating or managing them with my good tools to do things, think things, act ways that may not be their first choice.
So I think uh, we have never had a perfect scenario ever, right? We can look back in time, we can look through empires and the kings before that, the gods and worshiping the kings as gods, and uh, the evolutions that we have experienced that we know, we trust that this evolution will continue. And this evolution to continue, it has to be augmented, as in some of the scenarios that we have seen previously, it felt more like a greed for the resource, right? It was like, whatever the war is, it's not about personal agenda. It's more about the resource. If you look deep enough, it just becomes about resources. So I think this artificial intelligence is one of those resources that we will fight over, fight with, fight for, right? Because this data, we are really learning how it augments our patterns that we have developed already in our brain, not through just our being alive for however many years, but through generations, as in it has been passed on to us because we've been given a simple pattern, and then the pattern was built around it based on our environment that we grew up in. So this augmenting intelligence, AI, is definitely something that we'll fight over. But as we fight over it, we have to kind of ask ourselves that question, like, is this what we're really fighting for? Right? And I don't mean it necessarily as in like fight as in war and violence. I'm talking about fight as in standing up for an AI and augmenting an AI. How much do we know about this AI? Is this really good for us? Even if it's personalized for me, is this really good for me? I think that will happen more and more, as in this personalized AI will become so part of our life that, like, say, for example, I will fight for ChatGPT at this point, right? Because I don't want to go back to Google days. I don't want to just Google things and go through a bunch of blue and purple links trying to figure out what it is that I need to know. Well, ChatGPT, I'll fight for, right? But is ChatGPT really good for me? Because what is it teaching me, and where is this other one that could be better than ChatGPT? But ChatGPT has taken me in a way that I cannot leave ChatGPT in, right? So I think we will fight for some things, but what it is that we fight for is the question that we have to ask ourselves. And I think there's a teaching that's involved in it, right? Like we're talking about teaching here, right? We communicate, we trust, and we learn, and somebody has to teach us that. And when we teach, what is the good question to ask? So I think augmenting intelligence, the augmenting the teacher to teach, I think is a good. good way to go. But like you said, there's a sample out there. Even the teachers can be, found with one set of data, and the learners have another set of data. Learner came in with 8 second long chat GPT prompt that gave him some answers that, you with your life years of experience would say, no, that's not the right set of data. Yet that person is probably more attached to that 8 second worth of data than to the real data that might benefit him, right? So I know we're just talking about augmenting intelligence here, but I think the concern that we have is the ethics part of it, right? Who's ethical and who's not? Because we can talk about ed tech, educational technology. We can talk about, so many aspects of it, but the ethics of it, right? Who's responsible? As in, where does that start and where does it end? Because we've seen this happen before, where snake oil salesman has sold snake oil to many people, but who held them responsible? Where's the authority here?
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation because I'm hoping it brings more people to be thinking about those kind of questions, Asif. I think augmented intelligence at some level is about the ability of our tools, technology tools, to learn, literally. They're learning tools, right? When the thermostat in my house is knowing when I'm here and when I'm gone, and what temperature I like and what temperature my wife likes, and what's the most efficient for our house. And it's organizing all of that into algorithms and then managing my temperature. That's a wonderful thing. I just installed new irrigation controllers. I have a yard that I spend a lot of time in. I grow a lot of food here in the Central Valley of California. It used to be that I would could tell these valves when to turn on and when to turn off, or I would do it manually. Now they're all connected through the internet to a service that's reading my weather based on my zip code and knows it's raining tomorrow, so it's not going to irrigate anything tomorrow. It's measuring the percentage of water in the soil. It knows that last night, there was a potential freeze. So it waters early in the morning so to prevent damage to my crops because of frost damage. Those seem to be really good outcomes. But I still wonder who's making those decisions. And I still want to look at the data and make sure that I agree with it before I say, okay, because something that's dry that gets frozen is going to be dead. Something that's wet that gets frozen could be brought back to life.
Right.
All right. So, and those are simple examples of really good use of AI. I mean, we talk about our cars driving by themselves. Is there going to be good outcomes attached to that? I think potentially people who can't drive now, young people, people with disabilities, blind people, will be driven around autonomously by their vehicles. There won't be traffic like there is. There won't be parking problems. There's so many societal first world country problems that we might be able to solve. But who's controlling all of it? And is it a resource balanced, equitable? Someone's getting rich from my buying these tools, my temperature control and my water control. And at some level right now, cars are being managed by companies that are making billions of dollars with that technology. Is it going to be equitable? Is it going to be an advantage for all of us? Is it going to bring us closer to our tribe and closer to the tribe next door? Right. And technology has done some of that. We see a third of people who are getting married to people they met on the internet. That's 1 out of 3 people in North America. That's phenomenal. That's 1 out of 3 people. Now, do we know anything about the likelihood of those marriages being successful? Not yet, but they're probably going to have the same data as everyone else. So again, we have to begin to think about the benefits and weigh them against some of the potential, and then be able to think into the future. I don't think any of us thought about what it would be like to raise teenagers who couldn't be separate from their devices and how it interferes with families. But when we introduced computers, I was a very early adopter in the mid 70s to technology and education. Most of my teachers were afraid to press this left button. They wouldn't click on things. And it took a tremendous amount of professional learning time for us to be behind them, put my hand on their hand and say, click here. If it doesn't work, click here. You're not going to break the thing. It's okay. It's good to make mistakes. That's the way you're going to learn. That's the growth mindset. They were frozen in their patterns, as you described, that didn't integrate this new technology. Now everybody's clicking away. And unfortunately, sometimes we're clicking in places we shouldn't be clicking.
Yeah, I think that the story that you just said about clicking things, it just reminded me of I met when I was a teenager. I was a teenager, and that person was also a teenager, and that person has never seen a TV. This is in my lifetime. This person has not seen the TV, and his first reaction was to go up to the TV and try to touch what's on the TV to see if they're real people or not. And that's the perspective that I have, even to this
Hmm.
day. When we're talking about technology,
Powerful.
is that we have teachers and we have authorities that will teach us, authorities that will make sure that we are going the right direction. We have a strategy and we're following that strategy for tactical and operational level, right? It happens in military, it happens in corporate world, it happens in education, it happens in our family. Everybody has a strategy, everybody has to do some tactical work, and everybody has to be operational, right? So having said that, I think it's important that we talk about this emotional intelligence side of things, because when we say authority, it's not necessarily a group or a board or somebody in a zip code sitting there controlling another zip code, right? It's a matter of emotional intelligence within yourself to have that responsibility and be the authority within yourself. Just like you'd be a part of an authority or you would be authority over somebody else, but you have to govern yourself, the authority that you have, the emotional intelligence. And I think I have learned tremendous amount of emotional intelligence from you over the years. Um,
Thank you.
how do we create that emotional intelligence for this AI? Now that we have went through like clicking on mouse, we have connecting to the internet using 56K, using phones. Now internet is everywhere, even in our phones. Now we have AI coming through. Like, what's that emotional intelligence that we need to survive?
Yeah, really good question. And I love your television example. I hope he's okay now living in this culture.
That's right.
It's really striking.
That's right.
But I think one of the things I see happening in school districts as we redefine a 175-year-old system that's archaic at this point,
That's
which
true.
makes very little sense. I mean, it used to be that teaching people handwriting and arithmetic got us all communicating in ways that were predictable and consistent, the two words you used earlier, and made us capable of communicating across culture. But it's a little different than that now. And when I'm watching districts redefine education, they're catching on to the fact that teaching emotional intelligence, teaching what used to be called the soft skills. How do you connect with people? How do you communicate? How do you manage emotion? How do you manage strong emotion in others? How do you create peace? How do you manage conflict constructively? How do you regulate motivation and energy and mood? They're recognizing the importance of teaching that through school because culture is no longer emphasizing modeling and reinforcing that. Used to be the work of families, used to be the work of churches, less so, less so, less so. And we can find ways to communicate that are fairly neutral in terms of values. They honor agreed upon values. And in schools, we typically call that social and emotional learning or lifelong learning. And I'm watching schools struggle with content and curriculum versus social and emotional learning. And some schools have developed programs that are just about social and emotional learning, emotional intelligence. But I don't think you stop what you're doing and say, okay, put away your math books, boys and girls. We're going to learn about trust today. We're going to learn about active listening today. I think it has to be integrated into the curriculum. I think you model it and teach it all of the time. You don't have a specific class in it.
That's right.
You greet people at the classroom door every day, and we know that successful teachers shake hands, offer hugs, have a fist bump, whatever it is culturally that works. And excellent teachers ask the learners how they want to be greeted. They don't assume that the way they want to be greeted is that some kids want a hug. Some kids are uncomfortable with a hug. Some districts don't allow you to hug a kid, even in a public setting. So I think that there's a really important thought process to teaching, modeling, reinforcing the integration of AI into teaching and learning in safe and predictable ways without it being, okay, boys and girls, now we're going to put away our books and we're going to do AI. But maybe there's a problem that we're working on. Like a significant problem in our area here is how are we going to survive when water is such a scarce resource and everybody wants it, and we grow 2/5 of the world's food in our county, and we're fighting about water all the time. Wouldn't it be interesting to ask ChatGPT to give us some perspectives, plural, not a perspective, several perspectives about that, so that we can begin to organize our thoughts and maybe even some strategy for managing a very difficult problem that all of us are facing, which is about how we manage resources, whether that's water, oil, time, money, all of those things. So I think we do it in predictable, thoughtful, planful ways. We do it with bringing on early adopters who are finding success, using them as models, and having an SOP, a standard operating procedure that says, here are the boundaries and guidelines. Because one of the things that we do when the ethics are unclear is at least set up some guardrails. If my car is going to drive me to work safely, I want to know that if it crosses a certain line, there's a guardrail that's going to protect me there. Same thing when I use ChatGPT. I want to know that there's going to be some guardrails. And right now, those guardrails are still very much human defined. I have to go back and fact check what it tells me.
I want to. I know this is going to just add more to the conversation, but I want to, explore something with you, because I think we've discussed this many times. But this has nothing to do with education. This has nothing to do with authority's responsibility in teaching. This goes back to our emotional intelligence to pay attention to the water that you mentioned. There's shortage of water. The water is disappearing in places that you would be highly impacted by if the water was not there. You could have a water in your backyard all you want, but if the water is not in the right place at the right time, it creates a havoc that you have not experienced, at least in some zip codes in this world. That you really have to have that emotional intelligence to have an early detection of these sort of crises. And what I mean by water is that if you tap water into electricity that you definitely don't want to be out of, even if you run out of water for a little bit, you feel the electricity first, because people can live without water for 3 days. I don't think without electricity they will even go for 8 hours. I've lived through that. So I think this is completely off topic here, but I think there's just something that brings the emotional intelligence into the mix here, is that when you're looking for resources and your resources are scarce, you have to have that emotional intelligence, right? As in, if the water is gone, the electricity is gone, there is no chat GPT, right? What about that world where you don't have access to internet and internet is completely gone? Your devices are useless because devices run out of battery, right? So what happens then? You have to have that emotional intelligence. And I think to frame it from the resource perspective, why emotional intelligence is so important, not just in the content and curriculum, but just to have our survival needs met through emotional intelligence. If we are decaying our emotional intelligence capability to develop the emotional intelligence capability, what happens to us, right? What happens to resources? What happens to things that we take not for granted necessarily, but we just don't have to think that of, right? But it's happening. Water shortages is not a local issue; it's a worldwide issue, and
Global.
water is also adding to that electricity problem. That I think is far more important. If you say water, people's like, "Well, water I'll manage." It's in the grocery store somewhere. It's not necessarily that's the way, but electricity is how you find out there's no water left. Electricity gone, that means you have another problem.
I appreciate your sensitivity to electricity. I think most people would choose water over electricity just for survival. But it brings me to recognize that when we talk about emotional intelligence, most people think about me. Am I being emotionally intelligent? A central component of emotional intelligence is thinking about you. It's about being able to read others. It's about being other oriented. There's a social intelligence connected to emotional intelligence. And I might have all the water I need, but if my neighbors don't, I have to develop the sensitivity and thoughtfulness to consider them, not just my needs. And when we're doing that well, then I think we're taking care of ourselves and we're taking care of others, which is, for me, the central goal of intelligence. And so, how does AI help me take care of me, us, our community, and our world without just bringing resources and good outcomes to me? That's the bigger question. And I think it's a question that we'll be wrestling with for years, decades, generations, maybe even to come. But I also imagine that it will be shifting because AI is learning, it's developing, it's going to do that in a developmental way, which means that there's going to be crisis. But out of those crises is significant growth. Just like human beings, when we experience crisis, we're learning language. It's very difficult when you're two.
Right.
You have pretty good examples of that in your own life. But when you get it, you get through that crisis, all of a sudden, you can communicate in a different way. It's a whole different life. And that getting through that crisis and being resilient through that crisis brings all sorts. When children learn language, they learn toilet control, bathroom control. Wow, that makes them so much easier to live with in general. So I think as we experience some crises, and we will with I think there'll be significant growth and development. We just want to pay attention to how it's serving us all and who's managing those controls and whether they're doing it in an ethical, thoughtful, conscientious way.
Well, AI has been around for quite some time now, a little over 100 years, but human intelligence, emotional intelligence has been developing a lot faster than that, and a lot longer than that. But I think once we incorporate not just human intelligence for survival, but emotional intelligence for everybody to survive, and artificial intelligence to augment both of those, I think we will end up in a place where we'll have a different problem, and that's my end speech here: is that if the problems that I'm worried about today is not the problem in the future, that's a great start for me. As in, we have different sets of problems than the one that I'm worried about today, and that's the world that I want to live in, where the problems are not the one that I've been thinking about for the last 50 years. So I don't want to end the
That's
conversation, but
that's called learning, right? Yeah, we
so
will have learned
we will
something.
do a part two of this discussion as well, because there's just so much to talk about on this topic, and fascinated to hear you speak it from the perspective that you bring to the table. Because, like I said, we really haven't talked about this topic. We talk about many different topics, but this topic is something near dear to my heart, and I've learned tremendous amount of it from you. So thank you so much for taking this Sunday early morning call with me.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this information and to get it out to people who might have an interest. Thank you for being committed to a podcast that sheds light on a contemporary issue. I appreciate very much the work that you're doing. I think you're doing some of that professional teaching and learning right now. And it's the time when I get to say, take care of yourself so we can take care of them. Thank you
That's right.
very much for this That was a very fast 55 minutes, Asif. Thank you for your good questions and your good commentary. Be well.
Thank you, Barry, so much. We'll see you all